Good morning, Tansi Tual. Welcome everyone to First Peoples Cultural Council online learning series. We're going to be starting right now. I invite you to turn your cameras on if you want. So today's webinar is on managing First Nations Heritage Infrastructure projects, challenges and solutions. We have two presenters today, Bryce Ross from Skeetchestn Community School and Alyssa Currie from Tse'k'wa Heritage Society. FPCC, I want to give a little background on FPCC. So FPCC is a provincial crown corporation. We've been around for over 30 years, and we support the work of revitalizing BC First Nations language, arts, and heritage. I'm actually talking to you from Secwepemc in Secwepemc, Ulu. We have two offices, one in Wasanich, out in Brentwood Bay, and one in Kamloops, BC, in Secwepemc, Ulu. We provide through our work many grants, resources, and support for the revitalization of BC First Nations language, arts, and heritage. So we have three main programs at First Peoples Cultural Council. The first is the language program, and the others are the arts and heritage. I am the manager for the heritage program. As I mentioned before, my name is Karen Aird, and I also am a member of Soto First Nations through my mom. So just curious as to where everybody's joining us from today. I invite you to share that now in the chat, if you can. So a quick overview of the format today. Once we're done with some of the formalities and important info, we'll pass it on to our presenters for approximately an hour. Once they've wrapped up their presentation, we'll transition to a question and answer period. If for some reason you need to leave or lose connection, know that this is being recorded and it will be posted for you to watch at a later time. Our moderator today is Amber. You want to wave, Amber? Who is behind the scenes supporting those who are having trouble joining, moderating the chat and the Q&A function. For those who aren't familiar with the Teams webinar, you'll see on your screen that you can react to what's being shared. Feel free to share an emoji if you find the reactions button. We'll share some more helpful information for today before the presentation starts. Amber?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Welcome, everybody. If you're new to Teams webinar, you can share a reaction, like Karen mentioned, using this react button here. Once the presenters start sharing and presenting what they have to bring with us today, we're going to close the chat so that you can focus on the presentation. So the chat will be closed a few minutes after the presentation starts. But we really encourage you to share any questions or comments that come up by going to the Q&A function, which is at the top of your screen as well, this Q&A. So you can ask questions in there as you go, and they'll be collected for the Q&A period at the end of the presentation. And there's also a chance for you to ask me any questions if you're having any tech issues or someone you know that wants to join this session but can't, and we can talk in the Q&A as well. So those are the ways to communicate during the session using the React button or Q&A. For those that are just joining, we invited people to share where they're joining from in the chat, so you can do that right now before it's closed. There's also a chance to, if you don't like looking at your own face, you can hide your video. So if you go up to where it says View, you can go to the bottom, More Options, and you can go Hide Me or Unhide Me if you don't want to see your own face. And you can also change to have the gallery on the right of your screen or the top of your screen there. And lastly, if it's helpful for you to have captions during the presentation, you can turn those on for yourself by going to the three dots where it says More, going down to Language and Speech, and selecting Show Live Captions to support you attending and participating in the workshop today. And we're really grateful that you're all joining us. I'll pass it back to you, Karen.
Great, thanks, Amber. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Bryce Ross.
Skeetchestn Karen, Skeetchestn Amber, Lata Swentwin Huwaitep, Bryce and Squest. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bryce Ross. I was approached by FPCC representative to deliver a presentation on our project here at Skeetchestn. It gives me great anxiety to revisit with you some of the significant obstacles that we run into, but I do look forward to sharing our journey of perseverance today. Our outline, our timetable, our agenda for today is a little bit about me, a little bit about our project, a little bit about our challenges, and a little bit about our perseverance. Just an average cisgender white dude, married with children. I was raised in Ontario, moved to BC in 2005. I graduated from Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo in 2010. Been in education for about just over 14 years. I love how dynamic this profession is, and passion projects get me out of bed. The biggest takeaway about myself is that I love my family deeply. I love being a dad, making memories with my family on the weekends. I also enjoy chasing grants and making unique initiatives come to fruition. To date, at the school, I've been the driving force behind building a language and culture camp, which encompasses a pit house, a smokehouse, and tanning shack. Also, we just had our grand opening of our newly built school barn, which is intended to teach our students about animal husbandry. So projects are my jam. I have been working at Skeetchestn, where I'm circling here, for about 5.5 years. The community is located roughly 35 kilometers west of Kamloops in the beautiful Deadman Valley. The geography here is gorgeous, a desert oasis where I don't need to experience 13 months of winter, rolling hills peppered with coniferous trees and valley floors that host the Deadman Creek merging with the mighty Thompson River. I just absolutely love it. The objective of our project is to build a museum and pit house. These structures will help tell the story and highlight the rich history of the Skeetchestn people. The picture that you're looking at right now is part of the blueprints for the pit house that we're currently constructing on Highway number 1. Canoe working together to plan. To help narrow down community project ideas such as the museum and pit house, employees and community members participate on a multi-year basis in strategic planning sessions. We discuss our departmental strengths and areas of growth in these workshops. The process helps create departmental growth plan goals. Using the community strategic planning document as a guiding light and receiving support and approval from my leadership, I wrote a successful application to First Peoples Cultural Council to help cover the costs of inflation for building a museum coupled with an adjacent pit house on Highway number 1. While crafting the proposal, I tied into the specific strategic priorities of revitalizing culture, enhancing community infrastructure, and encouraging economic diversification. Skeetchestn Indian Band's vision is Skeetchestn is a strong, prosperous, and sustainable community of the Secwepemc Nation. Our main priorities are 1, revitalizing culture, 2, enhancing community infrastructure, 3, encouraging economic diversification. And I should kind of elaborate a little bit that those are the 3 goals that I tied into to write the proposal. I share a vision and strategic priorities because, as you most likely know, if you're going to implement big ideas, they need to tie into what the community is all about, where the community sees itself going, and what the members deem of utmost importance. Before we had any meetings with chief and council or community members, etc., we made certain that we could articulate how this project would tie into these areas. The first one, to revitalize culture, the museum and pit house will share rich traditional stories regarding the geography of the Temu, the land. For the second one, to enhance community infrastructure, this project will add to Skeetchestn Indian Band's repertoire of usable spaces. And for the third one, to encourage economic diversification, These facilities will act as an anchor tenant, meaning it's a place that will keep people within the community for a little longer, increasing the likelihood of people spending more money. What I mean by that is, like, where the museum and the pit house are being built, it's close to Skeetchestn Indian Band's gas station called Big Sky. So I just envision people going there with their families, you know, a dad or mom or a kia'a going into the gas station with their son, daughter, granddaughter, etc., and getting an ice cream, getting something from the gas station, a little kid hugging on the dad's pant leg or kia'a's pant leg and going, "What's that over there?" And then they're staying a little bit longer within the community. Timeline, what's that? When we planned this project originally, I anticipated a smooth start date and gradual progress to completion, following a trajectory such as this. I was quite ignorant. Here's an accurate representation of what has occurred thus far. We started this project in 2021. We're supposed to be finished in 2023. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen, and we're still not done. I was grossly naive in the production process of capital projects. You know, everybody knows Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. You know, when you create a business plan, you have to do your original SWOT analysis to determine the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your proposal. Well, basically, all of our threats came to fruition. Within the span of 3 to 4 years, we faced fires, floods, landslides, and labor shortages. In 2021, our community was evacuated from forest fires. In 2022, we had a flood in our community. We didn't need to evacuate, but it did cause global delays for the project. In June of 2023, the school that I work at, we had a landslide on our school field, completely wiped out our school field. Each year, during our primary building months of March to October, we were delayed by climate catastrophes or the possibility of disaster. Further, these disasters hurt us where it counted most, people power. We were already facing labor shortage issues with our project, and then we needed to allocate the laborers that we did have to help mitigate the imminent threats. However, no such thing as problems, just solutions. I stole this saying from House of Brian, which used to be my favorite HGTV show. He said it periodically, and I say it frequently. I use it in my day-to-day for managing Skeetchestn Community School. The host, Brian, he says it in a cheesy fashion, but I absolutely love it. It's solutions-based. I believe in the messaging, and I use it kind of as an emotional crutch. Whatever the problem, the obstacle, barrier, or whatever you want to call it might be, there's a workaround, a strategy, a solution. You don't need to go it alone. This mentality ties into another one of my favorite sayings. Teamwork makes the dream work. Lean on your support network. If you don't have one, headhunt one and make it yourself. Prior to starting this project, I didn't have that support network, so I had to reach out. I contacted members from SNRC, which is Skeetchestn Natural Resources. Their lead head carpenter, who's helped me through a lot of things. I've reached out to an electrician that's local to the community. I had to assemble a museum committee. Later on down the line, I had to find a project manager, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Take a chance. Our story isn't as captivating or groundbreaking as the discovery of penicillin. Okay? However, there is the commonality that this project was an accident. Essentially, I was writing a proposal to CERNAC to get money to build a pit house on school property. I added a museum in the proposal because I was dreaming big. Deep down, I actually didn't think I'd be successful since that proposal was at the national level. Then I found out a lot sooner from Construction Foundation of BC that I was successful in my application for money to build a pit house on school property, that was my original goal. With time, I actually forgot that I applied to CERNAC. Early on the development of the pit house on school property, well, where I was still a greenhorn in capital projects, I found out that we got the money from CERNAC to build the museum and pit house on Highway number 1. After about a year into the project, it was evident that it was going to balloon out of control and go over budget. That's when I wrote a proposal to FPCC to help support the cost of inflation. Not too long after, we found out that we were the successful candidates for this money as well. All of a sudden, we had all this money, and the dopamine was wearing off. Reality was sinking in that I had to make this project come to fruition. I knew absolutely nothing about making big-scale jobs come to fruition. With a little perseverance, I took that chance to work through it. Remember, there's no such thing as problems, just solutions. I love this quote from Michael Jordan. If you quit once, it becomes a habit. Never quit. I realized that our project was not on schedule. However, without a dog-to-the-bone attitude, this project would be even further behind. I've frequently picked up the phone or driven to the work site over the past few years to put the necessary pressure on the different contractors and collaborators to move the needle in the right direction. I've come to realize that there are many contractors who might not communicate effectively and will go at their own pace. I've done my personal best to hold people accountable to timelines. Don't assume that emailing people will move the needle to a closer completion date. You need to either meet people in person or get them on the phone. Putting pressure on people, it's a delicate balancing act. Some of the people that you'll need to light the fire under are band members. You don't want to burn any bridges and develop a poor reputation. So the strategy I utilized was to really kind of ham it up with how the funders are frequently breathing down my neck about deadlines and reporting. I reminded the leadership and contractors that organizations like to back a winning horse. And if we can't demonstrate that we'll honor what we proposed, we might not be considered for future funding. This relatively gentle approach has worked so far. Now, the pressure I put on visiting contractors when they're dragging their feet is a little more frequent and intense. I'm relentless at picking up the phone on a daily basis and having those conversations. For example, this is just me kind of role modeling. Hey, it's Bryce. Just calling to see the plan is for today and what the estimated time for completion is. Where can we gain some ground? I really need this to be done before we can move to the next step. So it's imperative that you get this done as soon as possible. I really appreciate your participation in bringing this journey to life. I'll give you a shout tomorrow to touch base, okay? My approach is borderline harassment or the Diet Coke of harassment. It's healthy, annoying persistence. Make sure you're transparent. Be open and honest with your FPCC representative. In my case, I was keeping open lines of communication with Lucas, my contact, and I wasn't trying to hide our progress or lack thereof in some cases. FPCC wants to work with you. They want to see your project come to fruition just as much as you do. I shamelessly asked Lucas for extensions, and by gone it, he worked with me. He granted those extensions. And I say extensions because I asked more than once. Project delays are a reality for many capital projects. Keeping your funder aware of any setbacks is a simple act of good faith. Be prompt to articulate what's holding you up, how you plan on overcoming the obstacle, and what the new timeline looks like. Don't be cheap. I wish someone told me this from the beginning of my journey into capital projects. Don't be cheap. At least don't be cheap where it counts. Source out a project manager. I learned really fast that I don't have the skill set to make a project come to fruition from A to Z and ensure that we are not taken advantage of. If you're already a successful candidate for FPCC funding or you're a hopeful candidate, make sure you call around and get some references for a good project manager. And I emphasize good because there are bad ones out there. It pays off in dividends. I realized that my previous slide was don't be cheap, and this slide is referencing making cuts to your budget. However, I'm referencing making cuts to the nice to haves, not the need to haves. In the initial stages of brainstorming with the think tank team, we discussed doing a time-lapse video of the project, purchasing bougie furniture for the museum, and having a surround system in the pit house that played background noise of a family speaking in Secwepemc. Simply put, our budget was going to sustain these nice to haves, and they were put on the chopping block. You need to know your bottom line. And here's some of the results or pictures of where we are to date. The top left corner is a picture of the outside of the pit house. The top right is the inside of the pit house. The bottom left almost shows the whole, picture with the museum, the pit house, our solar panel system, and some of the landscaping in the frame, while the bottom right shows a little bit of the inside of the museum. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished to date. And now I'm cautiously optimistic that the finish line is almost in sight. Skeetchestn for your time. Here is my contact information if you wish to get a hold of me in the future with any burning questions. But I do know at the end of this, there is going to be a time for questions as well. Skeetchestn.
Thank you, Bryce. I just want to make sure that on my screen, I'm having some problems with Wi-Fi, and I didn't really see your slides progress. So I'm assuming it's just at my end that it's an issue with Wi-Fi. But if anybody else is having problems, please let Amber know. So the next presenter is Alyssa, and she's going to be talking to us about some of the challenges she experienced with projects at Tse'k'wa. Alyssa, did you want to go ahead, please?
Ujo Asana, thank you, Karen and Amber, and for all of you for joining today. Hello, Jahanache, Alyssa Leushe. My name is Alyssa, and I am the Executive Director and Curator of the Tse'k'wa Heritage Society. I live in Fort St. John on the traditional lands of the Denizah people in Treaty 8 territory. I was born and raised here in the Peace region, and first learned about Tse'k'wa actually in a first-year university course. I was really shocked at the time that despite this site being located very close to where I was born and raised, I had never heard of it until interacting with it in that academic setting. And I was actually so intrigued and excited about this site that I wrote my term paper that semester about what was then known as the Tadoule Lake Cave. And so, I've always been really interested in exploring cultural practices and exploring stories. That carried me through my university degrees. But after I finished my degrees, I started working in cultural heritage. And for the last 3 years, I've been working with the Denizah people here at Tse'k'wa National Historic Site. Tse'k'wa, which means rock house in Denizah, is a cave site located in Tadoule Lake on Treaty 8 territory in northeastern BC. And Amber, you can drop my little pin on the map now. The ancestors of the Denizah have been visiting this site for 12,500 years. It is one of Canada's most significant archaeological sites, containing evidence of cultural activities dating at this site to the time of the Onlinachi, the giant animals at the end of the last ice age. Simon Fraser University came here first in 1974 and into the 80s and 90s to do archaeological excavations. And when they completed those excavations, the archaeologists took back all of the items that they had found to SFU, where up until very recently, they were largely inaccessible to the people whose ancestors made them. Fast forward to 2012, and 3 Denizah First Nations joined together to purchase the property containing the cave and established the Tse'k'wa Heritage Society. So Doig River, Prophet River, and West Moberly First Nations are all represented by a member on the Tse'k'wa Board of Directors and were the initial investors in the property and in the society. The Society's advocacy led to the property being designated a National Historic Site in 2019. And more recently, they've hired a staff member, myself, and we've been working together to increase public awareness of the site and also to increase accessibility to the site and particularly to the cave. Well, I started working with Tse'k'wa about 3 years ago, just as this major capital project was launching. In the last 3 years, Tse'k'wa has fundraised over $2 million to support development at the site, including a heritage infrastructure grant from First Peoples Cultural Council that was supporting the creation of an artifact repository. The FPCC funded project included constructing a geodesic dome, which would serve as our living repository, as well as retrofitting a previous residential garage to meet the provincial standards for an official repository. These steps, along with policy development that we were working on, were intended to help our goal of eventually repatriating and returning the Tse'k'wa collection from SFU. We also hoped that we could create a website that would have the functionality for virtual exhibits. And our goal was that when the items were returned, we would be able to showcase them to a wider audience. This image is from our interpretive plan, which was created during some of the initial planning stages of this project based on community consultations with each of our 3 stakeholder nations. One of the things that we were hearing from people is that they felt alienated from the materials or the artifacts that were created by their ancestors, and they felt there was a lot of mystery or even secrecy around the archaeological process or around the curation process. And so we wanted the dome to be a space where people could not only see, but be involved in all of these stages of the archaeological and curation process, right? Starting with excavation and cataloging all the way through to analysis and curation and those kinds of things. So in doing so, we hope that this infrastructure project would support capacity for the Denizak community members to become trained in archaeology and artifact curation. This project was part of a broader infrastructure transformation happening at the site. So for 3.5 years, myself, a project manager, and the Tse'k'wa Board of Directors oversaw really massive changes at our site. During this time, we were faced with many challenges, both big and small, that really threatened to derail our project. I want to share these photos with you because I think that we often see the really pretty finished photos at the end of a project, and we do have those too, but they sometimes force us to forget that behind each of these pictures is a lot of work and some of the messy bits that are necessary to reach that end result. These pictures capture some of the day-to-day work of the project, including some of the challenges that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to focus on 3 major challenges today, how we overcame them, and how hopefully you and your team can avoid them entirely when you do your projects. The Tse'k'wa building is a former residential home that was built in 1974. And during the course of construction, we discovered asbestos and other hazardous materials present in the house. So we reached out to WorkSafe BC, and after consulting with them, we ended up hiring a professional remediation company to come in and address the immediate safety concerns, and then another company to come in and do a hazardous materials survey that would allow our work to continue. This was an incredibly stressful and expensive time during our infrastructure capital projects. The remediation work and the survey halted all of our work across our site and had really major implications for not only this project, but the other projects that we were working on simultaneously at the time. In hindsight, one of the very first steps in a large infrastructure project should be identifying and hiring a qualified prime contractor. What we didn't realize is that in BC, if you do not hire and identify a prime contractor, you are the prime contractor by default. And at work sites, when there's multiple employers, multiple contractors, the prime contractor is the organization or the individual who's responsible for health and safety for everyone on site. Unless you have extensive experience handling a multiple employer construction work site, you are not qualified to be the prime contractor. And take it from me, you do not want to be the prime contractor, especially if anything goes awry during your project. Tse'k'wa was the prime contractor for our project and will not be moving forward. A prime contractor is best qualified to oversee and to coordinate your health and safety program for everyone on site. That includes things like that hazardous materials survey, which is legally required before you complete any renovations or demolitions in the province of British Columbia. It was a relatively small investment that not only was legally required, but also would have saved us thousands of dollars in the long term had we done it right at the very beginning. I would recommend that any organization complete that hazmat survey before they apply for infrastructure funding. If we had done so, if we had completed our survey earlier in the planning stages, we likely would have taken a different approach to this project. The safety of our staff and our visitors at Tse'k'wa is our #1 priority, and it should be yours too. If you have any questions or you need advice through your infrastructure project, and even before you start, please contact your WorkSafe BC office and talk to them for advice. I think that often people are afraid of reaching out to WorkSafe. They're afraid that they're either going to do something wrong or that they're going to get in trouble somehow. But a huge part of their mandate is to promote prevention, and that includes educating people on how to take these proactive measures so that they can hopefully eliminate these issues before they come up. Our WorkSafe office has been really helpful and has guided us not only on this project, but now we've been a little bit more proactive about planning future projects and reaching out to them, and we've been really grateful for that support. The presence of the hazardous materials that we encountered had massive implications for the timeline and the budget of our project. So we're currently in the process of developing a building feasibility study that will determine our long-term plan for the building. And that includes both safety and archaeological considerations, which I'll talk about next. If I were to do this project again, I probably would have started with that building feasibility study before we started getting right into building things. Tse'k'wa is one of 62,000 known archaeological sites in the province of British Columbia. Most of these sites originate from First Nations because they have been here and they have left evidence of their cultural activities for thousands of years. I emphasize known archaeological sites because most of the province has not actually been fully surveyed, and new archaeological sites are being found each and every single day in the province. And often they're found during these large capital infrastructure or resource development projects. All of these sites are protected by the BC Heritage Conservation Act and managed by the BC Archaeology Branch. So the province, is in the process of overhauling this act and working with First Nations to better align the act and the branch with the principles of UNDRIP. But in the meantime, First Nations communities are still essentially forced to work within this current system. The only exception to that is on federal lands, which include reserve lands. But if it's on reserve lands, there are federal statutes that apply. And so if that is the case with your project, you'll want to speak with either your lands department or your resource department to make sure that you're being compliant within your band. Any infrastructure work impacting an archaeological site in BC requires a permit, and it has to be filed by a permit holding archaeologist. There's a lot of factors that go into how long it can take a permit to be granted, but currently the archaeology branch can take 12 or more months to issue a permit before any shovels can hit the ground. This can take even longer in places where there are potentially overlapping claims or territories, and in places that are covered by treaty, such as here in the Northeast on Treaty 8. Archaeological work is costly, time-consuming, and can at times be difficult to budget for. Although we were aware that Tse'k'wa was an archaeological site, we didn't know the extent of the site or what we would find until we received our permit and started excavations and monitoring at the site. We now anticipate that the site covers the entire 5-acre parcel of land and that there will be intact archaeological features very close to our building that might require additional study. At Tse'k'wa, we pride ourselves on being stewards of one of BC's oldest archaeological sites. And so our standards meet and in most cases actually exceed what the provincial standards are. We made a case to the archaeology branch, for example, that we wanted to expand the current boundaries of the site so that we could proactively mitigate any impacts that we might have. We also really wanted to involve our community in this process, partly because they so often have been removed from the archaeological process. And so, for example, we felt it was really important for us to compensate knowledge holders who were involved in the archaeological excavations or who provided guidance on our permit application. And we also really wanted to include training components for young people in our community to learn about artifact analysis and curation. Our archaeological budget for this project far exceeded what we had planned. And if your project is located on or near a known or a potential archaeological site, this really needs to be a consideration for your project. First Nations government in BC can request archaeological information such as data or site records directly from the archaeology branch. There is a little bit of a delay in that, but they can provide that directly to First Nations governments. And the branch can also provide guidance about whether or not your project might require a permit and what that will entail. Our permit officer provided a lot of guidance for us as we were planning and adjusting our project throughout. We did take several cost-saving measures in our archaeology. For example, during our project, we minimized any ground disturbance to reduce the risk of impacting the site. And then we also planned our construction around lower density deposits so that when we did have to impact the ground, we would be reducing the amount of material that was being uncovered from the site. We also partnered with 2 universities, the University of Northern British Columbia and Simon Fraser University, to complete separate research excavations at the site that could also inform our infrastructure work. Moving forward, we are completing archaeological investigations before we apply for future capital funding. We also now have policies in place that will guide us if, for example, we uncover additional intact archaeological features or ancestral remains at the site. And those are the kinds of policies that you might want to think about at your site. Often when they're not in place, it's kind of the things that derail a project and often cause contractors to be quite upset with the archaeologists. We were very fortunate that when we put out our RFQs and RFPs for projects, we made it very clear that this was an archaeology site and that we wanted companies to be proactive about mitigating the archaeological impact of the site. And we've been very fortunate that many of our local contractors have really taken the opportunity to educate themselves about what that means and to work with us to make sure that we are really compliant, both with the rules and the standards of our community. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, Tse'k'wa's infrastructure project was only one part of a major transformation happening at the site. In addition to managing the capital projects, our very small team was also overseeing school tours, training programs, a rebranding project, oral histories, and an archaeology field school, and more. If I were to make one recommendation to other First Nations groups starting out on an infrastructure project, it would be to think really critically about your organizational capacity. It's tempting to go out and to apply for a bunch of grants and then just kind of figure it out as you go. But taking the time to prioritize your application, I think, will lead to a better overall project. One of the lessons that was quite hard, I think, for us to learn was being realistic about our capacity. In some regards, we were victims of our own success as we gained more funding than we had the capacity to implement. One really helpful exercise that we carried out was actually using Post-it notes. We decided in advance how many projects we felt it was realistic for us to accomplish in a 1 year and a 2 year span. And then we used Post-it notes to list all of the projects that we hoped to accomplish, and kind of used different colors to code them according to whether or not there was funding already secured or available to fund that project. In some cases, if we had already committed to the project. And having all of these projects laid out and being forced to fit them into a confined space prompted some really helpful conversations for myself and our board. Ultimately, what we decided was we turned down some funding opportunities in order to prioritize the ones that we felt best aligned with our strategic plan and that we had the capacity to implement. And Bryce talked about that strategic plan, and I'm going to talk about that as well. On the other hand, one decision that really I think helped us a lot is, and that I strongly recommend, is hiring a project manager to oversee the various parts of the project. This can be especially helpful when talking about managing budgets and managing timelines. As Bryce said, there might need to be a lot of follow-up phone calls, and that's something that a project manager can take off of your plate while you're trying to do other things. It can be really helpful to have someone who's able to take that step back and see the bigger picture while you are in the thick of things, because boy, were we in the thick of things. At Tse'k'wa, I am our only staff member, and I am not a Denizah community member. And so that meant that I was leaning a lot on our board of directors during this project, especially on cultural matters or sensitive things where we wanted to make sure that we were accurately representing and reflecting what the Denizah people felt were priorities. So all of our board members are representatives from their respective communities. Gary, Laura, Valerie, and the late Diane are all really well-respected members of their First Nations and are all very active within those communities. With all of the other responsibilities that they had within their communities, we occasionally experienced decision fatigue and delays because they needed to address some of the other more pressing issues happening in their communities. Similarly, I was experiencing burnout as I was trying to balance everything and bring the project together to a successful completion. And especially, I think, because I was a newcomer to the community, I felt it was really important not to disappoint people or to, have this be my first impression for the community. So having your board members, having a really robust, whether it's a board or a leadership team to lean on, to have subject matter experts, whether it be in, for us, the cultural aspects, or maybe in the financial aspects or the other parts where you as a team lead might not have, is going to be really critical. And we have also drawn on the expertise of various people, whether it be archaeologists or community members who have expressed interest. We've had quite a few community members do pro bono work for us to be able to support our budget to get us through with a successful completion. All of those things are really, really important. And if your organization doesn't already have a strategic plan, that should be one of your very first steps. Strategic planning will help your leadership decide what is most important to them, and often that includes a component of community consultation. If you do have a plan, like we did, you have to make sure that you're prepared to make what will ultimately be some really tough decisions about what things are ultimately most important in that plan. In my personal opinion, I think it is better to over-deliver on fewer projects than it is to under-deliver on more projects. Moving forward, we are being more strategic about what opportunities we pursue and make sure that we are doing them to the best of our ability, within the budget and the timelines that we project. And sometimes that does mean, like I said, under-promising and hopefully over-delivering. Next slide, the planning for the challenges that you are inevitably going to encounter is a huge part of any infrastructure or capital project. While Tse'k'wa experienced many different challenges through the project, we found again and again that our community was behind us, pushing this project forward over the finish line. We also found that there were allies in our community who were willing and able to support the work if we were transparent about the challenges we were encountering and asking for help. They might not have understood the cultural significance of the work that they were doing, but if they had the ability to help, but again and again, we found that people were willing to do that. And like I said, offering, whether it's advice or pro bono support, all of these things really made a difference on our bottom line. And the result of all of this support was the successful completion, not only of the dome and the website and the repository space, but all of the other projects that we had on the go at the time. And that includes things like the new outhouses, the amphitheater, the interpretive trail to the cave. All of these spaces are now complete. And although we still have a lot of work to do, we're really proud of the work that we've done so far. So on your screen here, there's a couple shots of our brand new repository space. This was a massive renovation from what used to be a very dark and dingy residential garage. In the middle of the slide, our archaeology dome was constructed. You can see on the bottom there with the ground intact. And we actually have in that picture an archaeology unit that is currently still open for people to come and to see that site. We just secured some funding to get a programming cart for that space, and we're one step closer towards realizing that vision that our community had for us. We also have the outhouses and the amphitheater, which are both new accessible resources that we have put together at the site. And not pictured is a 240-meter interpretive trail down to the cave with benches and accessible picnic features as well. So we had a lot going on. And again, one piece of advice that I would give moving forward would not to be to take this approach, although it did eventually all come together for us. I think that it would have been a lot less stress on all of our team if we had focused on one or two of these projects at a time. But I do understand that it's very tempting when there is funding available to try to want to do it all. And so moving forward, we are taking a little bit more time to pause and to really think about what things that we want to focus on most when multiple things align with the strategic plan. During all of these challenges, having our community's vision of what the site could be is, I think, really instrumental to our success at the site and the success on this project. So this March, after 3 years of advocacy, community consultations, policy development, and of course, construction, Tse'k'wa Historic Site was officially recognized as an artifact repository by the BC Archaeology Branch. This picture was taken at Tse'k'wa the same day that 45 boxes of archaeological materials were returned to the site, nearly 50 years after they were first taken by SFU archaeologists. Now that the Tse'k'wa collection has been repatriated, the Tse'k'wa Heritage Society is going to be using that material for future educational and cultural programming at the site. We hosted a large community celebration this summer to announce and celebrate the return of the collection. And we're working on a few other things that are going to come out to the public next year to further acknowledge and to share that story with people. So for us, this infrastructure project, this capital project, was really just the beginning of something larger for us and for our community. Our work really would not have been possible without the support of First Peoples Cultural Council, and I really want to take the time to sincerely thank you. Ujo Asana, thank you for providing not only the funding to support this infrastructure development, but also provided valuable guidance and cultural support to our organization throughout the project. Karen and Lucas were really supportive through this process as we were encountering these different challenges, and sometimes just having another person to talk through some of these challenges was really helpful. So I know that I speak for everyone here at Tse'k'wa when I say how grateful I am for that help and that support. And I hope that by sharing some of what we learned, that we can pay some of that forward. And we're really happy to answer any questions during the discussion, or if anyone wants to get a hold of me after this discussion, I'm happy to share what we learned and as much information as I can to support that work in other communities. Before I end off on the discussion, I want to leave you with the words of one of our elders, Mary McKencha from Prophet River First Nation. During one of the very early days of our community consultation, she told us that the Denizah people were strongest when they act with one voice, one heart, and one mind. She also told us that if you want something, to go out and make it. That advice is what carried Tse'k'wa through some of our most difficult days, and I hope that you can now carry it with you on all of your projects. If you want something, make it. Ujo Asanala, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the chat.
Kumpton, thank you, Alyssa and Bryce. Really, really helpful guidance. And I so appreciate the way you both were transparent and shared in like some of the serious challenges that both of your projects went through. And I also know there was a lot of pivoting that happened, and sometimes you guys were on your own, and we both had small teams, and I'm really proud of the work that happened for both projects and both of your work, and I'm so again grateful for all you've done to support the revitalization work for First Nations culture and heritage. There were a few things that really stood out from your presentation before we get to the questions that I thought were incredibly connected and relevant to what we're seeing with a lot of the heritage infrastructure projects across BC. And it's not just for Indigenous heritage infrastructure. There's challenges across everywhere with infrastructure projects. There usually are issues with procurement, with contractors, with timing, and it's a well-known part of infrastructure work. But two of the things that really stood out to me was mentioning the need to have a project manager, and how important it was, to have somebody, whether it's a full-time person or part-time, or somebody in there to make sure the project, if it's big, is successful, right? And another thing that really stood out to me was the strategic planning, like the need to have a plan to guide your work, recognizing that even though it's just a plan, it's there to keep you going and going back to it over and over as you sort of move into other opportunities, as you start to go down those rabbit holes, right, into different projects, archaeological work, issues with contractors. You have that plan to start to guide you. And also those plans are often living documents. They are able to be adjusted, and it's really important for funders as well, that we like to see a strategic plan being shown, and that there is a vision, and that there's going to have the community support being part of that. Thank you. Kinanes Kumten, everybody.